Good day, everyone. This is Rita Choi, founder of Asia HRM. Asia HRM is a human resources community for Asia, focusing on leadership and coaching. We help organizations build high-performing teams. And recently, we conduct a few workshops for different organizations with excellent feedback. I'm so pleased with that. And we are also an advocate for coaching. We believe that everybody deserves to be coached. There are times that we are stuck. We need coaches to help us to see things from different perspective. That's why we have the Coaching Engage Plus coaching platform connecting qualified coaches with their potential clients. We also embark on AI augmented coaching. If you want to know more about it, just let us know. Last week, we did not have this session because of the Chinese New Year holidays. For those who celebrate Chinese New Year, since I'm from Hong Kong, I have to say, 恭喜發財 to all of you. For me, I really enjoyed the holiday because I ate a lot and I had a lot of opportunities to visit my friends and relatives. And this week, I need to be disciplined by eating less. So as a continuation of our HR Leaders series on challenges faced by HR leaders, and the topic for today is succession planning. I can remember that in our HR survey conducted last year, succession planning actually is one of the top challenges faced by the leaders and has also become an important topic in the agenda, even in a board meeting. And today, we are so glad that we have invited an expert in this area. And I just shared with her that this is also one of the important projects that she's working on in her daily duties. She is Sneha Chopra. She is currently the Vice President, Group Talent and People Development at CapitaLand, based in Singapore, where she leads enterprise-wide talent and leadership priorities, including succession planning in support of long-term organizational performance. Sneha is a senior talent and organization strategy leader with over 14 years of global experience, spanning both consulting and in-house executive roles across Asia, Europe, and Latin America. Previously, she was Vice President Leadership and Organization Strategy at GIC. She began her career at McKinsey and Company and later held senior advisory roles at PwC, Willis Towers Watson's, and partnering senior leaders on complex enterprise-level business and people decisions. So without further ado, we'd love to invite Sneha to the session so that she can share with us her experience and knowledge. So Sneha, so anything that you would like to share, to say to our participants today, to our viewers today?
I think first things first, Gong Si Fa Chai. Very happy to be here. Thank you so much. It's fantastic. I've, as called out, I've spent most of my career working at the intersection of business strategy, leadership, and talent, partnering with senior leaders on succession planning. So really excited to talk about the topic today and exchange some perspectives.
Thank you so much. So today we are going to do in a Q&A format. So I have prepared some questions for Sneha. And if you do have questions or comments, just feel free to put it in the comment box. And Sneha will answer all of them.
I will try.
Okay. Thank you so much. So for those who are watching, just say hi to us so that we will say hello back to you. Okay. So let me start with the first question. As I mentioned earlier, succession planning has become a very important topic, even in a board meeting. Why is that? Sneha, can you just...
Happy to share. I think what's fundamentally changed is that succession has recently shifted from being an activity which is more about talent planning and talent development to one that is more about business continuity. And that's why the board and some of these very senior leaders are a lot more involved and invested in it. So a few different things have converged at the same time. The first is that we are seeing a lot of leadership turnover. Especially for CEOs and senior leaders, it's happening faster and it's happening more frequently than ever before. If you ask the likes of PwC, Russell Reynolds, Spencer Stewart, all of these organizations have come up with so much research that says that the CEO turnover has been trending upward for years now, and the average tenures that CEOs spend in their seats is shortening. So I think it was roughly 12% a decade ago, and it's moved to 18% in terms of turnover. And the average tenure was about 10 years, and now it's moved to about 7. So the fact that all of this is happening at the same time obviously raises questions around business continuity. The second driver is that the strategy cycles are getting very short, and the leadership development cycles are still long. So we're still developing leaders for a strategy that's quickly getting outdated. So it's not so much about whether, that there's a little bit of a mismatch between the strategy and the succession. And then finally, the supply side has also fundamentally changed. We're seeing significant generational shifts. People are impatient. They don't want to wait for 10, 15 years for progression. They're very mobile. They want to move across geographies, industries. They're hungry for learning. So if you put all of that together, it just basically brings us back to that point about succession is no longer a talent planning or a development exercise, but how do you think about business continuity and enterprise risk? So it is the top of minds of boards and very senior leaders, and we're having very frequent discussions about this.
Hmm. Yes, Naha, thanks you so much for sharing that. When you mentioned about new generation, right, it made me to remember that recently I heard of a story about Gen Z, a new having an interview. Not actually, it's not having an interview. This Gen Z actually is given a career development plan by the HR department, and he just has
Mm,
a view that 2 years too long for him. He wants to make the plan 1 year. So we can see the impatience of the young generation, right? Okay, so in your sharing, you
absolutely.
mentioned about the leadership turnover is now from 12% to 18%. What has made the turnover on the way up?
I think there's just a lot more changes in strategy today. Because of that, the leaders that we are hiring are for an outdated strategy. So the leaders have to constantly be upskilling themselves and making sure that they are relevant for the markets today. The expectations have increased, and in general, the leaders themselves are also mobile enough to be able to do different jobs and move on into different roles. As we're thinking about development, even for those in enterprise critical roles, as they move up into more senior roles, we need to have a robust pipeline of people to take on those roles as well. And hence,
Mm,
there's just a lot more changes and the need to be agile for leaders and for successors.
very true. They need to be agile. Yeah. Otherwise, they cannot stay long in the organization.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Snaha. So, what do you see as the biggest limitations of how succession planning is typically done today?
We
The
were just
biggest.
speaking of agile, right? I think most traditional succession planning systems and models were designed for a much more stable world. So today, when roles are predictable, roles, or rather, today when roles are not predictable, careers are not as linear, it gets harder. In the past, we also used to rely on performance to predict future success. But as a practitioner, what I've seen now is that succession is often reduced to a list of names that you put in the boxes, ready now, ready in 3 to 5 years. And these names are reviewed once a year. So these are the models that would make a lot of sense when things were very, very stable. But what
Mm,
it does is that it creates a false sense of security. The organization feels like we're covered at the moment, it's all okay. But the moment the strategy changes, the plan doesn't hold. So, there are organizations even in Singapore with very strong technical or operational successors, but when the role changes, either because we've decided to go into a new geography or we've decided to change strategies, there is a lot of struggle. So the issue isn't whether about the lack of talent, but it's about the fact that succession today is anchored in the definition of leadership of yesterday. So I think that's where we fail when it comes to using traditional models, and there is a need to rethink and make sure that it's aligned with where we are going rather than where we were.
Okay. So you mentioned about the traditional model actually no longer works because of the changing environment and also has to be in line with the strategy, in line with the business strategies. So what would be the sort of model that we should adopt today in order to cope with this changing world?
So I think this is where the biggest shift is required. If we think about whether it's a succession model or even if you think about leadership potential in general, we do need to now move to a place where historically, for example, potential was defined by strong performance in current role, your overall tenure, and candidly, it was also about whether you're visible with senior leaders, right? They can see you
Mm,
and hence they can promote you, if we're being honest. But future ready succession and potential focus is so much more on trajectory, the direction, rather than track record. In my experience, if you strip it all away, it comes down basically to two things:
mm,
whether the person has ambition and whether the person has the agility to be able to keep up with all the changes. That agility can be mental agility. Are you able to quickly learn? People agility, are you able to quickly adjust across cultures, differences? But ultimately, it is about agility and it is about ambition. And in my experience of working with many organizations and sort of my research, a lot of different companies are actually pivoting towards it. Microsoft makes it very explicit that you have to prioritize learnability over experience, because don't know if your experience will be as credible going forward because the job might change. Similarly, you have Amazon that actually says learning and being curious is part of our leadership requirements. And then, if we look closer in Singapore, DBS has been so intentional about developing leaders who can learn, and they say they should also be able to unlearn and adapt because the role keeps changing. So, both succession planning and the way we define potential for leaders needs to be anchored in agility now.
So thank you so much for your sharing. So are you saying that something happened in the past is no longer important, like strong performance, their tenure, or even visibility um, um, in front of the management? Are these no longer critical factors for you for your company to put people in this succession planning?
Don't get me wrong, I think these are all incredibly
Mm,
important. So, you do
mm,
actually look at past performance to ensure, or you get an
mm,
initial sense of what that person has been able to do so far. All I'm saying is that past performance is not a guarantee that this person will be
mm,
able to succeed. As an
mhm,
example, if I have been a fantastic data um, a person who basically does data entries for the last few years. I'm taking a very simple example. And I've
mm,
categorically focused on that. Now, my past performance has been fantastic. My accuracy has been 100%, no errors. My speed of entering that data has increased. That doesn't mean that data entry will not potentially be automated. And if that role is automated, all of that experience and expertise that I've built, which has gotten me so far, is not going to help me get further. So, do I,
mm.
as a data entry person, have the agility to adapt and say, I'm now noticing in the market that data entry takes you so far, but actually, data strategy will help me understand what kind of models I can build, etc. Can I do a quick course with Skills Future, upskill myself, figure out how I can stay relevant? And then, if this person is able to be agile and has the ambition, so those two things to learn, I won't be surprised if at the end of the day, when it is that AI does hit this job, they're able to pivot and then continue to be successful in their roles. So, past performance is very important. Visibility from leaders is very important. It is not, however, a guarantee that that's what's going to take you forward. Agility and ambition are important markers when you're thinking about succession.
I see. Understand. We just received a question. Like, can you see it, Slaha?
Yes,
From a participant. From my
I
viewpoint,
can.
the real bottleneck in succession is workforce agility. Oh, okay. It's tough to get stakeholders to buy in to the cross training and rotations needed to make it work. What do you think?
I 100% agree, Absin. It is not easy at all. I almost feel like our job in HR is we have to manage a supply chain of talent. So we have these very strong people, and it is our job to make sure that they reach the right parts of the factory so that they are developed and then eventually ready to take on some of those top roles. At the end of the day, I mean, this is not new to any of you very senior practitioners. Learning is 70, 20, 10. So 70% is in fact on the job by way of cross training, by way of rotations, by way of making real life problem solving decisions on the ground, right? You have to go through the fire to really come out as a complete and finished product in that sense. 20% is about making sure you have that mentorship, you have the exposure, you have the right networks. And then only 10% is that development, the formal trainings that we do. And it's ironic and funny how much emphasis we give on that 10% and how much we ignore that 70%. So I hear you, and I agree that it is incredibly difficult. The one thing I'd say is that I think as HR professionals and practitioners, we are very kind and very nice, but we should feel comfortable to own our space and expertise as people experts. So if we go with the confidence that we need to talk to the business leaders and say, I know you understand your business, but I understand people, and I can work with you to make sure that you get the best out of them. Otherwise, you're not getting what you need from these people, and hence business performance is suffering. So I think if we can speak that business language, but ultimately anchor it down to helping them think about how we can make their people do more for them, it'll help us win. But it's not easy. The real bottleneck is, in fact, this.
Wow, Snaha, I love what you just mentioned. You know business, you know people. Let's work
Mm,
together to get the best out of people. Wow,
exactly. It's a
very nice.
partnership.
I love that. I love that. I love that. Okay, let's move on. And so, if that's the case, then how should organizations rethink leadership potential in this new environment?
So leadership potential, I think it's very simple. We were just talking about that emphasis on ambition and agility. At the end of the day, that's what I think leadership potential is all about. So when it comes to mental agility, is how quickly somebody is reframing their problem, being able to learn. People agility is whether they're able to actually understand the contexts, understand the unsaid, and react better to it. Change, whether you're able to understand how the strategy changes and be agile. So it all boils down to agility and ambition. More recently, a lot of organizations that I know have actually updated their potential models to categorically focus on agility, and in fact even moved away from calling it an assessment of potential but an assessment of agility, because you need to understand how this person will react to the change, um, because change is here to stay, it's not going away. Ambition is also very, very important. I think we do have very high performers with a lot of potential and the ability to be agile who are genuinely just not interested to take on bigger roles, either because of the life stage they're in, or whatever their personal situations are. So I think it's aligning those folks that are agile and ambitious so that we can bet on them and have them take on our critical roles.
Hmm. Wow, you just share that instead of having assessment to your performance, now we have assessment on the agility level. Is there anything that we can do in order to help our leaders to, or even our employees to improve their agility level?
There's a lot of trainings now categorically focused on simulation based learning. And I think partly that is to address how less we focus on the 70%, because we
Mm.
want to do training in a way that it's actually targeted to what the person learns and how it is that the person makes decisions and how they process data, etc. We can actually have simulation based trainings so that people are able to apply all the context that they have in their mind into actual problems and then solve them. I think that gives them the exposure to be more agile, but nothing replaces that 70%. Things like rotations, things like giving them stretch opportunities in particular. If you find somebody who is doing well, giving them that extra project, that's something that is actually feeling a little bit out of their depth, to push them into greater thinking, is probably what's going to help build those muscles. and make them they'll even realize for themselves whether this is something that they're finding exciting. And it's also interesting to see how folks with potential actually approach these challenges when they are stretched. You'll always have the people who say, actually, don't give me more, I'm overburdened. And then there'll always be others who are almost excited by it to say, hey, I didn't think about this really interesting project. I'd love to get on it. But I'm kind of busy. Can we prioritize something else? Because this one looks really interesting. So it's about that hunger that you bring when you come. Are you willing to learn? Are you willing to try something new? Or are you just not interested in that, which is also okay. And it could corroborate with your, like I said, stage of life or whatever other situations might be. So it's about just understanding that. And I think helping them develop in the way that they want to be developed.
Yeah, it's very nice. I remember that I heard of a story from a company. It's quite a well-known company in the world. And this is how they do their performance management system. Basically, they will have this KPI setting every quarter. And then
Mm,
the employee just compete with themselves, like in quarter one, and this is what their objective is. And then once they've fulfilled it, then in another quarter, they need to set a much higher uh, objective, which is much bigger than the previous one,
mm,
in order to
mm,
stretch them, in order to
mm,
push them to be more agile and to improve themselves. So
mm.
I think each quarter the employee just compete with themselves and make themselves to be much tougher and much better than before. And I think it's quite interesting. I think it's in line with just you just shared, right? Just
Yeah.
just stretch ourselves and then make us to be more agile and also to be a better version of ourselves.
Yes,
Very
absolutely.
nice, very nice. Okay, let's see. Okay, so earlier we mentioned about this assessment, right? So how should organizations recalibrate their talent assessment models when the half-life of skills is shrinking so quickly?
I think at its core, it means shifting the focus from what people know to how quickly they can adapt.
Mm,
So it's not just about current capability, but about their learning velocity. So instead of very heavily weighting on the depth of their expertise, it's about looking at how quickly these folks are able to pick up new skills, new contexts, new business models. So I think it's about that. And then secondly, it's also about role fit. Moving away from just role fit to actually more broad scale deployability. So the question is no longer whether this person is ready for the role, but is this person flexible enough that I can actually put them in a few different contexts and they'll do reasonably well across them? Which
mm,
goes back to some of the examples we were sharing earlier, right? If you have a person who only does well in a certain situation, then that's probably not agility. It's the person's ability to only do that one thing really well. But if you're able to demonstrate a range of things you're able to do, then you know that they're likely to be successful in multiple scenarios. In fact, a lot of organizations today now assess successors across multiple scenarios rather than just for a single future job. So I've identified, for example, person A has the propensity to take on something broader. There are two roles, and I will in parallel try to develop this person for both because I don't know which one I may need this person for first. But there will obviously be technical skills which need to be targeted to the role, but the broader skills can be across both. So, because these skills decay so fast, actually things like simulations, stretch assignments, real time problem solving, they're much better indicators of future readiness than past performance, as we were talking about.
mm. Okay, so what I have learned from you is again, I think adaptability, right? They need to be agile, right? They need to
Mhm.
be agile enough for them to take on maybe different roles at the same time, flexible enough to take on different
Yeah.
roles at the same time, and they need to do it reasonably well. Okay, that's very nice. And also we move from what they know to learning velocity. Okay,
Yes.
that's very nice. Thank you so much. Let's move on then. Okay, so we do have questions. Earlier we talked about Gen Z, right? They're so impatient that they don't really want to wait so long in order to get promoted. in order to achieve their career goals and so on. So for Gen
Mm.
Z, right? So Gen Z is defining what they expect from leaders. Which of these expectations do you believe will fundamentally reshape leadership models over the next decade?
I think the biggest shift that Gen Z asks for in leaders is they want their leaders to be authentic but backed by competence. Um,
Mm,
Gen Z is far less impressed by titles, and then authority based on just your seniority or your position without actual substance doesn't work for them. They expect leaders to be clear with what they stand for and honest when they don't know something and credible in how they make decisions. So I guess just to be clear, I'm not saying that leaders need to be soft or endlessly sort of, consensus driven with Gen Z. That's not what they're looking for. But I do think that they value clarity, fairness, and decisiveness with their leaders. So the other thing is that they don't want to just be told what to do. They want to very clearly understand the why. And
mm,
if I'm honest, earlier in my career, I have worked with Gen Z folks who have, when you're trying to rush out something important and urgent, and they would question a lot of the decision making, a lot of the assumptions to say, but why, but why? It does get a little bit like, why? Because I say so. Because this is fast and urgent, you should really get it done. But having said that, the challenge that you get from them when they challenge your assumptions, etc., actually shapes you to be a much better leader.
mm,
And what I learned from that experience is obviously I come out as a more mature leader who understands when it is, in fact, important to pause and to reflect and to take into account all of these things. But it's also opened up this concept of reverse mentoring, which was always there, but
mm,
I feel like it's got a new life where I
mm,
actually want to reach out to my Gen Z colleagues and ask them to say, what, we've been doing this the same way for the last 20 years. Um, Coming from a completely fresh perspective, what do you think? What doesn't make sense here? What would you challenge? And they're very happy to do so. And they're very honest as well. So I think they're also looking for authentic, open leadership, people who can admit when they are wrong, when they don't know something, when they're open to change, as long as they also have that substance and credibility so they know that they're learning when they're working with you. Over time, I think, to your question on leadership model, it's going to push us away from the typical command and control sort of setup to more trust based authority, where you have to earn your credibility rather than you just get it because you've been promoted and now you're senior. And I mean, honestly, I think this shift is not just good for Gen Z, but it probably makes better leaders for everyone to understand the rationale for the changes, everyone to be along with us in the journey. So I know we say a lot of things about Gen Zs being impatient and things like that, but I do feel like they're making the workplace a better place for everyone.
yeah, very true, very true. So we need to move from the positional leadership, right? What we call that, from command and control to being a trusted leader, and then backed by credibility and competencies. And we also need, as a leader, we also need to be um, genuine, honest, and then value clarity and be decisive and so on. Wow, very nice.
Yes,
And I think you also mentioned about the why, right? Gen Z wants to know about the why, right? If
exactly.
the more they know about the why, I think they will be more proactive, more flexible to achieve the purpose set by the company. Very true, very true.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love the reverse mentoring concept as well, so that both parties will
Mm,
have better understanding of each other. We learn from each other. It's no longer that I know everything, I'll teach you, but we can also learn a lot of things from Gen Z, especially now
yes,
they
we
know a
grow
lot
together.
about social media. Yeah, right, right.
Mm.
Very nice, very nice. Okay, so for those who are viewing our session today, just feel free to put your questions or comments in the comment box. I'm sure that Slaha will be more than happy to answer them. Okay, let's move on. So, how can organizations differentiate between genuine generational shifts and short term workplace trends when designing their leadership pipelines?
I think this one is a hard one, right? To be able to
Yeah,
differentiate between a generational shift between a short-term trend and be able to figure
yeah.
out which one is best. It's difficult, but I think we can do it. Genuine generational shifts will tend to show up consistently, and they'll show up across different contexts, whether it's different geographies, different business cycles, different industries. You'll see it over and over again. There's a repeatability, there's a pattern. What are these things? Expectations like fairness, transparency, credible leadership, things that we're talking about. These are very stable, no matter what language you're leading in, what industry you're leading in. I think this is the norm, in the sense that this is the expectation today. Short term trends, on the other hand, usually spike in specific conditions, whether that's tight labor markets or new technologies. And then oftentimes, after a little while, when the conditions change, they soften. So I think it's about what sticks and what doesn't, which helps you understand, obviously, what is a generational shift versus something that's a short term trend. So let's, on the first hand, let's look at, the expectation of fairness and transparency. So younger leaders expect leaders to explain decisions. They want to understand the priorities. They want to understand how you came to that decision. What were the trade offs? This is what we're talking about, right? And I think this demand holds true in all conditions, even tough ones. Even during restructuring, they want to know, how did you come to the decision of restructuring? What made you decide? Why are we doing it now? Whether it's cost pressure, even in simple things like performance reviews and management. What could I have done better? Why did I get this rating? I'm not sure if that line of questioning was as obvious and apparent one generation ago. So they want to understand the why, and that's the same across industries. That's not going anywhere. Similarly, this point on authority must be earned, not assumed. This again shows up across business cycles, right? We've noticed, maybe Asia, to be fair, there's a slight cultural nuance to it, where we're still respectful of authority versus some of the other parts of the world. But actually, if we look at an example like work arrangement preferences, flexibility is important, yes, but expectations from people on whether they want to be fully remote or hybrid, etc., these I think are now probably situational shifts. So preferences will vary depending on which industry you work for. Some industries are back to
Mm,
work 5 days a week. Some industries have stuck to 2 days, 3 days. They are dependent by geography. They're also dependent on market conditions and life stage. New parents, people with aging parents. So if there is a specific need, people demand more flexibility versus others who may not need it or want it as much and may actually focus on the social aspect of being in office. So those are the ones which I think are more in the moment right now. They're seasonal versus the other things that we've talked about, which are sort of generational shifts that will be here to stay. So difficult
mm,
question, but I think you can figure it out somewhat if you just try to see whether that particular trend, are you seeing it as a pattern across different geographies, different business cycles, different countries? If that's the case, it's probably here to stay.
mm. So we need to be observant, right? Okay,
Yes.
very, very nice, very nice. And okay, so here comes another question. What are leading organizations doing differently when it comes to succession planning?
Um, the leading organizations, the first move is probably from role based succession to capability based. What I mean by that is, typically you would look at succession when you look at a certain individual and you say, we need somebody to replace this person in time to come. But organizations are saying, okay, the person is one, let's look at the role and the capability. That means 5 years from today, what will that capability or what will that role look like? For that capability, for that future strategy, we need to find the right person. We were talking about that, the role about the data entry person. So if I'm to look for the person to play this job 5 years from now, I will probably not look at somebody who is able to have all the data entry skills today. I will look 5 years from now, what will this role likely become when it is augmented by AI? What do I expect this person to do? And then the role will likely be somebody who can check for accuracy, make sure that they're able to apply their business judgment to make sure that whatever data has gone in is actually compliant with our rules and systems and things like that? Do you have that kind of judgment? So then when I'm doing succession, I do it for that future capability versus for, you know, person A does it today, we need a replacement for person A. So I think that's the first shift. The second one is that instead of this being an annual exercise, it's a living system. I was sharing with a colleague that we don't take this to our board or with our leadership meetings, etc. And this has been happening for a few years now. In the organizations that I work, we don't talk about succession once a year. We are constantly talking about succession. There is a change in business strategy. What does that mean? We are entering a new market. What does that mean? We are seeing a sudden spike in our business in this particular area. What does that mean for succession? So it needs to be a living conversation. Doesn't have to be a very detailed, very long-winded, conversation where you're spending a lot of time. I think it's just about having an eye on this person plays the role today. Here are the two people that we're thinking will play it in the future. If we're opening this business in India, should we think about giving one of these two people exposure to go to India so that they're also learning along the way? So it's very quick tidbits, but you're always thinking about it. So it's in the back of your mind, so you're prepared. And then I think the third and the hardest, and I think this is part of the question that was raised also, is how do you move things like succession from being owned by HR to being owned by the leader? So they need to be accountable, responsible. And again, so many organizations, you'll have the likes of Nestle, where senior leaders are explicitly accountable for building bench strength. I've also had the good fortune of working for a few organizations where bench strength is such an important criteria for leaders. If you don't have bench strength, the leader's performance review is in fact dinged to say you're not doing your job as a leader if you're not growing your next generation of folks to eventually take over your role. So you're putting business continuity at risk, and hence you are not doing your job. So I think it does need to be owned by the business. It requires a significant shift and very hard one to drive. But that is what successful organizations are doing, those that are focused on new age succession planning.
Wow, very nice. From role based to future capability. And succession planning is no longer an annual thing, right? We just have to do it on an agile basis from time to
Regular.
time. And also, yeah, regular basis. And also moving the ownership from HR to leaders. Wow, that's amazing. So among these three, right? If what do you think would be the most challenging one?
The most challenging is definitely number three. Um, the first one could very well be a paper exercise, right? But you can do it in the sense that I as an HR practitioner and somebody who understands my business as well, I am able to figure out how the roles are evolving and what kind of future capabilities will be required. I can have a few conversations with experts, etc. And for my most important roles, I kind of have an idea of how they will evolve and what the requirements will be. So done. Check. The second one about constantly bringing that up in meetings, making sure we're thinking about succession planning, being that person on the table can be done because that's under my control. So check. But the third one, which is about how do you share responsibility? It's not necessarily about moving it to the leader, but how do we co-own
Mm,
this? And how do I build
mm.
that accountability from you as well? That's the hard part. But that is the if we're able to get that done, and like I said, I've actually worked in organizations where that is the case. So when we are able to make that happen, that's when the real magic happens.
Wow. So if we say for example, if I really want to go for this co-ownership, okay, um, of this succession planning, so what will be the first step that you advise us to do?
You hope that you're actually being strong propagators of talent where you can actually go and have an intelligent conversation on the succession planning. I think there are HR folks out there who don't necessarily spend the time to understand the business. So if you don't understand the business, it's very hard for you to show your value and explain to the
Mm,
business why it's important for them to listen to you. So one is building up your own knowledge, understanding, credibility so that you can actually give targeted advice. I think
Mm,
that's something that you can control and you can, it's self-learning, continuous improvement, which is all fantastic. So that would probably be step one, and then communicating that clearly. From a systems and processes point of view, the most successful organizations have actually embedded things like this in the leaders' performance expectations. So it is a goal or a KPI for the leader to
mm,
build their pipeline over the next 3 years. And if they don't do that, then that reflects in their performance rating and in the outcomes, right? Whether that is compensation based outcomes, progression based outcomes. So if I can say, leader A, you lead this particular team today. If I was to promote you to a different team in the name of agility, I'm going to move you to a completely different team because I think you can do better. But you've got nobody today who can take your role because you never developed them. So you've basically not been a great leader. And hence, if you don't have that capability, we have to wait for you to build that pipeline because you can't always bring people in. Of course, hiring is one way to do it, but succession planning has to be a healthy mix of folks that you've developed internally and that external hiring that you do. So I think that's a little bit of how one is about building your own capabilities so that you can have that conversation. And then from a processes point of view, it's about if there's anything that we can do to build in that greater accountability via either performance management that directly impacts the leader, that's helpful. One of the softer measures is role model. If your top team, your CEO is on board and understands the importance, then sometimes when the message comes from them, the top leaders, it also resonates more. So it might be a matter of getting that role modeling or that kind of sponsorship from the top to help you in getting that kind of co-ownership from the business.
mm. Yeah, very true. Support from the senior management is also very important.
Hmm.
Okay, very nice. So I believe these are the one or two practical actions that we can take, right? If we have to do to strengthen succession planning immediately. Anything do you want to add on, Snaha?
Um, I think we've talked about it, right? So the first would be to stress test our succession against actual scenarios, not just job descriptions. Where are we actually trying to go, and how do you do that? Then it is a little bit about that focus on 70-20-10. So don't focus so much if you can on the development programs, but more on development exposure and on the job training. And then I think just making sure that you're taking calculated bets, thinking about who those potential successes are, giving them those stretch opportunities so that they can actually build. And then eventually all of this comes down to, we were talking about how it's not just about growing people and talent development. It is more focused on business continuity today. We are seeing a lot of churn. We
Mm,
are seeing a lot of changes in the top team. So, in order to keep it current, we do need to make sure that we're building the right pipelines to support them.
very nice, very nice. So it's towards the end of the session. Any closing remarks for us?
I've enjoyed this so much. So, thank you so much for the opportunity to have this conversation with you today. Succession planning is obviously a topic that's very close to my heart. So, very excited to be speaking about this. And thank you to everyone who joined. If you've got any comments or questions, we'd love to hear them and continue the conversation outside of this meeting.
Yeah, it seems that we have one comment here from, again, I say it's from the same lady. Let me show you here. Okay. Yep. Yep. Seen, right? For years, the industry has debated how to prove the ROI of HR initiatives. Since business to or corporate goals are influenced by many factors, how can HR specifically claim the ROI of a succession planning? Wow, that's a good one. Mhm.
It's a
That's a good question.
fantastic one, and such a the we were talking about it right up front, right? I've had the fortune of seeing teams be in a position where succession planning has worked and seen when succession planning has not worked. And when it doesn't work, it reveals itself in a very quiet way. So you will have a leader who potentially exits, and you realize that there is absolutely no one to fill that role. And I think it's less about, when something is done right and done well, it's seldom talked about. It's only when it goes wrong that it's talked about. And that is probably the case with something like succession planning as well. It's only when you have an empty role and you don't have a leader to take on that role in the short run, and then we're scrambling, trying to figure out from the market who we can hire, which takes long cycles, etc. Even if you get somebody from external, it takes 8 to 10 months for them to actually understand and build that business understanding, to drive performance, etc. The failure point over there is quite high, and there's a very risky business. Even if you're hiring outside in for succession planning, the best practice is actually to bring somebody 1 to 2 years before they take on that role, bring them on as deputy so that they actually get to see the incumbent, get to understand the organization, etc., and then are very smoothly moving into that role eventually. So uh, it's funny that we talk about the ROI of a succession plan, but when it doesn't go well, the impact to business continuity and enterprise risk is so high that I think boards today are really starting to understand the value of it. And then there are some metrics that we use to basically measure the strength of the plan. One of them, for example, is what is the ratio of successors that you have to each role. If I have a particular role, what are how many people do I have who I think can realistically take on this role in the next, say, 2 to 3 years? And then are these the same people who've been sitting in this box for the last 5 years and never moving into the fact that they're ready, or are we actually seeing some refresh? Then the other thing that I've seen organizations do is that they have one really good person, and that person is in the succession plan for 6 roles, which is again a huge risk. So those are some of the things that we can measure more from the point of view of the succession strength and the ROI of the program to make sure that we don't make some of those mistakes, and flag them early.
Yeah.
I hope that
Yeah.
helps.
Yeah. I think availability of the successor is one of the important uh, matrix, right, for us to know, to measure the success of the program. Thank you so much. And we do have some, I think, comments from 2 more people here, like Putri. Thank you so much. So watching from Kuala Lumpur. Thank you so much for insightful sharing, especially dealing with the younger generation and the workforce. Yeah, very interesting sharing. And one from China. Okay, watching from Chengdu, China. Glad I cut this finally. Thank you so much for watching. Okay, so that's towards the end of the session. Again, thanks so much, Sliha, for the wonderful and insightful session. And now we all know that succession planning is also no longer same as before. Besides focusing on the strong performance, we also look at the agility and also then the aggressiveness, ambitions of our employees, right? Okay, very nice. So we will continue with our session next Wednesday. And so for today, and thank you so much for watching us, and we'll be in touch and wish you the very best, and enjoy the rest of the week and wish you the very best. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.